Today on Diesel University, we're going to talk to you about the advantages of choosing head studs versus head bolts in your light-duty diesel application. Now, let's talk about what's going on in engines today. In light-duty diesels, all light-duty diesels are turbocharged at this point. Now, in a turbocharged engine, you're getting increased cylinder pressures. Increased cylinder pressures are leading to more and more head gasket failures, and the heat that is contained inside the engine that is compounded by EGRs and DPFs, power tuners, so on and so forth, is actually leading to some of the bolt stretch that you're seeing, expansion and contraction. Now, we're not going to go into every metallurgy difference between a stud and a bolt because there's plenty of reading out there on that. But what we're going to do today, again, we're going to talk about the advantages of using head studs versus head bolts and why it's going to keep you from having a breakdown. Now, it's going to come back to one core principle, and that's going to be clamping force. Now, a head stud, this head stud in particular, this ARP 2000, this is a 220,000 PSI tensile strength head stud. Now, head bolts, like this Cummins bolt, this is a torque to yield bolt, or I'm sorry, this is a torque to angle bolt, excuse me. Torque to angle bolts are always going to have a certain amount of stretch that they're going to have when you're during the tightening sequence. In fact, most of the time, if you're going to decide to check these for reuse, you have to put these on a stretch gauge or measure them in some way to see if they're going to be able to be reused or if they have been stretched too far past their usable limits. With a head stud, because of the superior materials in head studs and the differences that the clamping forces are applied in head studs, you're not getting the stretch out of a head stud, and they are able to produce a more repeatable and better clamping force for you. Now, a head stud is engaging the block with the coarse threads just like a head bolt is engaging the block with the same coarse threads. Now, one thing that they don't talk to you about in the difference between bolts and head studs, and you can look at the difference in the length of these side by side. You can see that the head stud is much longer than the head bolt. The head bolt is going to engage a certain amount of the top of the threads that are, for lack of a better word, inside the block. A head stud is going to go much deeper inside of that threaded bore, and it's actually going to get into a untouched portion of threads that have not been torqued against. If you're putting head studs in your truck, they've already had head bolts in them, so they have already had a torque to angle bolt in them, so the threads that are in your engine block have already had a torque force applied to it. This is getting you to a fresher set of threads. Okay, let's talk about the forces that are applied on head bolts versus head studs. Now, a head bolt has two different type of rotational it has two different type of forces that are applied against it. Not only does it have a linear force that is applied against it, it also gets a rotational force. The rotational force that is applied to a head bolt will give you an inaccurate torque reading. With a head stud, there is no rotational force that is applied to the head stud. The head stud is placed into the block, it is put in finger tight. You then add the washer down to the head surface, and then put the nut on the stud. The clamping end of the stud is a fine thread versus a coarse thread. The fine thread is able to give you a better clamping force than the coarse thread is because of the decreased angle of the fine thread pitch. So your head stud nut is attached to the top of the stud, obviously, and then torqued down. This gives you a linear force once you apply that torque, whatever the torque value may be for your specific engine. That gives you a linear force against it, which will give you a better clamping load and a more repeatable torque reading from your torque ratchet. So that's the advantages of a head stud versus a head bolt. Again, in today's light-duty diesel engines, they're pushing the envelope every year in every new model year, going for higher and higher horsepowers and higher torques. We're in the business of selling you performance products that are going to give you more horsepower and more torque for your engine, getting you a more efficient vehicle. In this case, you definitely want to use a superior fastener like a head stud versus a head bolt. If you have a question about this video or any of our other videos, please give us a call. Thank you.